Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. So, Chai with my Bhai is back, and Alhamdulillah, this time season 3 is going to be available on the podcast app, both on Android and Apple devices. So, if you're on either of those, then click the link below, inshallah. Subscribe to the podcast. I promise you're not going to want to miss it. And now it's accessible for you wherever you are. If you're on the train, you can listen to it with your headphones in, or you've got AirPods, Beats, whatever headphones you have, inshallah. You can listen to it wherever you are, whenever you are, inshallah. And if you're watching on YouTube, as always, just remember you can watch the video. And all the previous episodes from the last 2 seasons are available on YouTube. If you go to the playlist on Nasiha Session, the YouTube channel, if you go to the playlist, it's called Chai with my Bhai. You can find all the previous episodes there. And inshallah, from now on, all the future episodes on the podcast app. Peace. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to yet another episode of Chai with my Bhai. Today's episode a little bit unusual because we've got the absence of 2 members and it's only myself and Imran today, which is a first, I believe, right?
I believe so.
Never done this before?
I don't think so.
First of all, give salam to the people, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, people.
So in today's topic, inshallah, we're going to be discussing the issue of intellect from the angle of people, using their intellect to interpret the texts, and also people preferring the intellect over the text. And by text, we mean evidences in Islam, so the Quran and the Sunnah. So people just using...
Like they think they know better than the deen. They hear an ayah and they in their mind like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, from that angle, and also from the angle of people who go and try and interpret everything themselves from their own intellect rather than going back to traditional methods, or as some people they will say, medieval methods and medieval scholars.
Medieval, a'udhu billah.
But can I ask a question? Is there anything wrong with using the word medieval?
Yeah, of course there is.
Why?
Because for you to say, like in our tradition.
Just generally, like what does the word medieval mean?
No, that's what I'm saying. Okay, medieval is used to describe a time in which there was like draconian kind of, methods of torturing people. It was just after the Dark Ages, like people had just come out of like absolute barbarism, and they're still like early in civilization, or they haven't even reached like real civilization. It's talking about the time that was like the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
But the problem is that when people try to when people try to say, for example, you can't say medieval Islamic scholarship. Islam never had a medieval age, because the time when these people here in the UK were in the medieval times, we were prospering. We had Andalusian Spain, we had Baghdad, we had
So let me just pull out the actual definition of medieval. It says relating to the Middle Ages. That's the adjective, which is a medieval castle. So that's the official.
But
it's relating to the Middle Ages.
But that's European though.
Okay, and then there's informal, which is resembling or likened to the Middle Ages, especially in being cruel, uncivilized, or primitive. For example,
basically what I just said.
Without other people around, I would let my flat degenerate into medieval levels of squalor.
Yeah.
So you're saying...
So people, when for example, like, because people are going to be confused, because obviously you're talking about people who... Let's just contextualize this. Basically, there are people that are coming out and they're saying that the traditional method of understanding the text is medieval.
Yes.
And they refer to scholars as Ibn Taymiyyah and whatnot as
medieval
scholars, right? And they see themselves to be people at the forefront of reform and reformation and like as if they've entered this era of enlightenment, right? Do you see what I'm saying? But I'm saying that obviously, and based on that, they use they use this as a reason to justify why they understanding the deen through the intellect, because they're saying obviously we're not medieval anymore. Does that make sense? But I was saying that concept of when you think of medieval, like when I think of medieval, I think of Robin Hood times. I think of John II or John I, who was at the time just like, taxing the people, beheading people, burning people at the stake. That's because the medieval times only existed in Europe. Medieval age, as it's understood historically, never existed amongst the Muslims. We were at the forefront of civilization. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you use that term, you're trying to denote a certain characteristic in the mind of the person. When you say Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Kathir or so and so is a medieval scholar, you're imagining him like as some barbaric, old-fashioned, anti-science, anti-progress kind of, because that's what the medieval times was, is when the church was beheading people, it was gouging people's eyes out, cutting their tongues off for making scientific
It's
progress.
kind of like making those scholars inferior to yourself. By saying you feel like you're superior.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but our scholars, like for example, Ibn Taymiyyah was a polymath. He himself was a mathematician. Like scholars would have a basic understanding of so many different natural sciences before they even started.
But with that said, do you agree though that no doubt technology and lifestyle has evolved a lot since those times, and things are very different now in the sense where we've got access to a lot more technology, a lot more things that previously people were unable to do. So if someone's talking strictly from that angle, is it wrong for someone to say medieval? Or
no, of course wrong, because medieval has got nothing to do with technology. It's got to do with how people deal with each other. It's got to do with you having a very black, dark, narrow-minded tunnel vision look at the world, in terms of a very just not civilized, as you should, cruel, exactly how you defined it. Does that make sense? So being cruel and being uncivilized has got nothing to do with a lack of technology or a progress in technology. By the way, those same scholars laid the foundation for the technology that exists today.
In what sense?
For example, I'm not an expert in this, so I don't really want to talk about it, but there's a book.
Can you be a little bit closer to the mic?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, so I don't really want to talk about that, which is not my field of expertise. But for example, Ibn al-Haytham was an Islamic doctor in what you would call the medieval ages. But it was in the 10th century. He wrote a book on optics. In fact, the word camera comes from him, if I'm not mistaken. Al-kamara is an Arabic term used to describe the lenses inside the human eye and whatnot and so on and so forth. So he actually wrote down the foundation for what was later to become the scientific method of observation, hypothesizing, and so on and so on. He wrote down the skeleton of what is the scientific method, upon which people like Francis Bacon came and codified the scientific method as you know it today. But they themselves gave props to these medieval. I'm not saying Ibn Haytham was a scholar of science or whatever, but the point is that Islam never understood that medieval. It never existed for us.
Okay.
Do you understand?
I understand what you're trying to say. So you're trying to say is that it's not a case of, in the case of comparing those scholars to us now, it's not about their time and our time. It's about them intellectually and us or certain individuals intellectually believing that the intellectual is what the intellect is what the difference is. It's not about the time that they're in.
But that's not even the point I'm making. I'm saying that by using the terms like medieval,
is degrading.
What you're doing is you're paint, literally words are vehicles for meaning.
Of course.
So when you hear the word medieval, you're talking about witches being burnt at the stake, barbarians, they don't know how to clean themselves. You know what I'm saying? So you're thinking of the Crusades, the Templar Knights. That's what comes to your mind when you think of medieval. So when you say medieval scholars, and you're talking, and in the same breath you're talking Ibn Kathir, in the same breath you're talking, Ibn Taymiyyah, in the same breath you're talking Al-Dhahabi, and people, how have you positioned Ibn Taymiyyah in the minds of these people? I'm saying that was a different part of the world. They were advanced, they were clean, they had street lights. Andalusian, you know how we got these street lamps?
Yeah.
Andalusian, Spain had, at the time when Muslims run it, 800-900 years before, we had street lights, bro, in Cordoba. We had lanterns, the streets were lit. We had sewage systems, we had water systems. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's no medieval times back in Muslim times. You know what I'm saying?
So going back towards the issue of the intellect, to what extent is the intellect valid, or to what extent can you use your intellect when it comes to the deen? Because someone might argue that someone used their intellect to come to the deen in the first place. The reason why they believe in Allah is because of their intellect. The reason why they believe, the signs of Allah, they interpret them through what? Their intellect. The Quran, when they read it, they use the intellect to read it, so on and so forth. So where do you draw that line? Is there an issue with using the intellect in totality, or does it come into it depending on certain situations? What are the sort of guidelines of using your intellect?
Well, Ustad Abdurrahman has got a much more detailed podcast on discussing this particular kind of, on a foundational level, explaining how it all kind of works. So I think we should link it at the bottom. People to watch that would be very good for them. But just generally speaking, to answer your question in short, the intellect does play a role. It plays a very important role. Allah Azza wa Jal, He rebukes people who abandoned their intellect. in totality, those who never had their intellect, who don't use the intellect. Allah encourages us to use our intellect. But the role between reason and revelation, intellect and revelation, I think Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he kind of summarized the relationship in a very nice way.
Okay.
He said the intellect is like the vision,
Okay.
but you can't see if there's no light. Do you understand?
Uh-huh.
Right now I can see a lot, right? I can see
Yeah.
everything, but I need the lights to be turned on. We've got the light coming through the window, but when it gets dark and it's nighttime and there's no street lights on and it's absolute darkness, my vision can't see anything. Does that make sense? So the Quran and the Sunnah is the light that shines.
And
Then
allows
you
your
use
intellect.
your reason and intellect and you can see. Does that make sense? And that's the relationship that the two of them have.
Okay, but I'm saying, so what are the limitations or what are the boundaries in place for which you can use your intellect when it comes to, for example, when it comes to, if you find a evidence or, you know, an ayah or a hadith that comes your way and you just can't get your head around it, you can't comprehend it, for
Yeah.
example, it just doesn't make sense to you, you know, that how is that possible physically, scientifically, for example, you know, someone might turn around and say, you know, the Isra wal Mi'raj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how is that possible? Or, you
Yeah.
know, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, how is it possible that there's millions of people behind a wall? Like, it's not possible for
We
a
said
wall.
millions, we don't know how many there are.
Or, you know, for argument's sake, you know, for that many people to be hiding behind a wall for all these years, we don't know how they're eating, how they reproduce. Like, it doesn't make sense. So,
That's why it doesn't have to make sense to me and you. Allah said, تمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا. Allah said, your Lord completed his speech in truth and justice. So Allah told you this is true. Allah told you what I'm telling you is true. And of course, Allah Azza wa Jalla, He sent down the Sunnah as well. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Allah said that Muhammad doesn't speak of himself. Rather, what's coming down to him is revelation. So Allah sent down the Quran and He sent down the Sunnah as well. So both of these are things that Allah Azza wa Jalla ultimately sent down. And Allah said, تَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا. Allah said He completed His speech in truth. So it's true. Now there's many things that we know to be true, but we don't necessarily understand. Does that make sense?
but
For example, go on.
but then my response to that would be, for example, one of the ways that you know, you yourself have, you know, refuted, for example, Christians
Yeah,
on the issue of Trinity,
yeah,
is that it doesn't make sense.
yeah.
How can God be a human and God at the same time?
Lovely.
So why can't you apply the same rule of it doesn't have to make sense, but it's true.
Lovely,
God, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is
Lovely.
above, or, you know, a Christian would say God is
lovely.
above the realms of rationality and sense and intellect. So why do you not affirm the Trinity when it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense, but it's true? So why is it that, for example, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, or, you know, these other things, do you affirm that it's true, but it doesn't make sense to you?
So this is something that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he discussed, yeah, when he was refuting the philosophers and the people of Kalam and whatnot and so on and so forth. So be careful, that might fall. He mentioned that there are things that are impossibilities,
Right.
and then there are things that are not impossibilities, but there are things that your intellect, it won't be able to get to this itself unless it's informed.
Can you give an example?
I'll give an example. An impossibility is, for example, for you to say that a triangle has 4 corners. That's what Trinity is like. That's why we say it doesn't make sense. This type of not making sense is it doesn't make any possible sense. Like it's not possible. Now, there's no way, no shape or form that you could tell me that this triangle has 4 corners. There's no way you could tell me that there is a God who's independent but dependent at the exact same time. Does that make sense? You can't tell me I'm here but absent at the exact same time. So that's what Christianity is like. Now, there's other things, like for example, how
Like, for example, a man being swallowed by a whale.
for example, the Prophet, we don't say well, but a fish, a big fish. Yeah.
Okay, a big fish.
So Yunus alayhi salam, like for example, you know, there was a video, I watched it on YouTube, like what would happen if you were swallowed by a whale. Yeah. And they would say like, you wouldn't be able to survive because the teeth would chop you up. And if they did, there's 4 stomachs that the whale has, and you will go through the acids, and
I think I saw that video.
each stomach will break you down until, like basically you can't survive. So I'm saying, but if I came and I told you, but there is a person who went inside of a big fish and survived and came out, it's not something that is rationally impossible.
Just like highly improbable.
That's not even the point here. The point is you ask how. Do you understand? So there are some things that are intellectually, rationally impossibilities. And that you're like, that's Christianity. Does that make sense? That's, for example, a triangle with 4 corners. But then there are other things that rationally don't make sense in terms of the how. Because you haven't been informed how, you haven't seen how. But it's not impossible to conceive a how.
But isn't that subjective? How do you define something? Because for someone, a certain thing might be, no, that's definitely impossible. Yeah. But for someone else, might be, no, that's just highly improbable. For example, even the fish thing. Someone who's a marine biologist who knows and believes that there's so many fish out there and they study, they might turn around and be like, no, that's impossible.
He can never say it's impossible. Shall I tell you why?
Why?
And that's my point. Because a marine biologist, a scientist, any empiricist, someone who observes the world, will tell you, I have not observed every possible outcome. I have not observed all the variables. I have not. Now, for example, this is how science works.
Okay.
A scientist goes to Cardiff and he says, I saw 100 white sheep. So he now concludes and says, all observed sheep are white. Does that mean every sheep on the planet Earth is white? There are black sheep.
Yeah.
There are brown sheep. There are grey sheep. Does that make sense? He hasn't observed that yet. Every time he observes it, what does he do? He adds that to his findings, and then he revisits his theory to shape around the new finding. Does that make sense? So scientists have not observed
every single fish.
Not only that, if we're talking about fish, 65% of planet Earth is unexplored.
Is that as in land or sea or both?
I mean, that's both. 65% of the whole Earth has been unexplored. As for the sea, only 5% of the seabed has actually been mapped out accurately. They've only been able to map out 5% of the Earth's seabed. Right. 70% plus of the Earth is water, by the way, yeah? The seabed, only 5% of the seabed has been actually mapped out. So you're telling me, like, I mean, who's to say there isn't a fish that swallowed Yunus alayhi salam, who didn't have teeth and didn't have 4 stomach and didn't have acid? I'm just saying you haven't observed all the possible variables. So I'm saying the only thing you're going to ask here, you won't say it doesn't make rational sense. Only impossibilities don't make rational sense. Here what you say is that the rational is not enough to explain the how. That's the difference. Does that make sense? For example, the issue of Ya'juj and Ma'juj.
Yeah.
The notion that Ya'juj and Ma'juj are a living tribe, blocked to this day behind the wall that was built 4,000, 5,000 years ago. That wall miraculously is still there. People can see on the one side, and on the other side, you have these savages that Allah knows how they're eating, drinking, replicating, whatnot, and they're still there for eons and eons and eons. This is the standard interpretation of our scholars of the tradition, not of the Quran and Sunnah. You understand what I'm going to get at, okay? We don't blame them. In their time frame, the world was unexplored. In their time frame, nobody traveled the world. Obviously, dare I say, anybody who knows science and geography and modern civilization, you cannot believe that there is a tribe for 4,000 years trapped behind a wall. I mean, if you believe this, that's your position. I cannot believe it. I'm just being, I find this very difficult to believe.
Stupid. Well, like, it's actually ignorance. It's so arrogant for a person, especially someone who claims to be an academic, to say it doesn't make sense to my rationale that there is a tribe of people that is trapped behind a wall somewhere on planet Earth.
Therefore, I won't believe in it.
Therefore, I won't believe in it. You know why? Because as an academic, as a rationalist, you know that the majority of the Earth has not even been explored. Who's to say that there is not a place on the... Okay, there are some islands on planet Earth that we've never visited. Did you know this? There's a planet...
I didn't know. I mean, what I did indirectly, as in there's a planet, an island that recently got
I'm saying there's islands that we can't even go to. Like, for example, there's an island off the coast of... It's on the Indian Ocean. It's called the Northern Sentinel or Sentinel, Northern Sentinel Islands, where it's the only group of people who've never met civilization. They live there and they're barbarians. Anyone who sets foot on the island, they kill them. Anyone who goes close to the island, they kill them. And since then, no one goes to the island. Like no one from our civilized world has gone and explored that island and seen what's in there. Who's to say that there's not a big wall there and Ya'juj Ma'juj are sitting there? For example, I'm saying there are places where there's volcanic activity where you can't go. You've not observed. You don't know what's there. Does that make sense? There could be some hidden oasis inside, some, mountainous region, and Ya'juj and Ma'juj are there. Like, majority of the earth, I'm talking about land, it's not even inhabited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And who's, like, for example, within caves, there are some caves in which there's life. There's vegetation, there is whatever. I'm saying, who's to say that the Ya'juj and Ma'juj are not living in some cave somehow, somewhere in behind some wall, and they've got a food supply, they've got a water supply. There's water supply within mountains. Like, so for you to come out and say, in the 21st century, I can't fathom and I can't perceive and I can't conceive in my mind a situation where this tribe has been living behind a wall for 4,000 years. So are you saying that you've seen the whole world? Have you explored the whole world? I'm saying scientists are telling you 65% of planet Earth has not been explored. So what if they're chilling in some 65% Ya'juj and Ma'juj are there?
But not even that. I'm saying, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they mentioned Surah Kahf, right?
Yes.
And at the beginning of that same surah, Allah gives the story of the people of the cave. And they spent hundreds of years
Look at that.
sitting inside a cave.
Sleeping in the caves.
And they came out and they were as if they were normal.
And that's from the miracles of Allah Azza wa Jal.
And they didn't need food.
And
They didn't need drink.
Yeah.
So if you can believe in that,
Yeah.
why can't you believe that the same...
Not just that, there's something even more powerful. You believe that Isa alayhi salam was created, Allah created him through the Virgin Mary. You believe that Adam was created, no mom, no dad, Allah created him, kun fayakun. Look, why? Kun fayakun, be and it is.
But I think the argument that was presented was that those events have explicit texts being very clear and direct about them, whereas Ya'juj and Ma'juj, there's no specific evidence saying, for example, that they are still alive and that they're that there was only one. And I think
I'll be honest with you. I believe that's batil. If you look at the hadith, and even the hadith of Sunnah Tirmidhi, it does mention that they are constantly trying to, bring down.
Can't that be
the point I'm making?
Metaphorical?
Say that again.
Can't that be metaphorical?
So the default position is that you take the evidence as it's apparent, unless you have an external evidence that takes it off.
But I'm saying that default position came from medieval scholars, right? So why can't we change the default position?
So firstly, I really don't like the term medieval scholars, but they're not medieval scholars. They were the greatest thinkers. People today, Ibn Taymiyyah studied in Harvard and Oxford.
As in the equivalent?
No, they are studied.
Oh, sorry, I think meant as in he studied.
No, his works.
Okay, yeah.
Studied in those universities and those places. I want to digress. The point here is that this is why, look, I'm saying the evidences do suggest, and this is a lie.
I'm going to stop using that word, even from the angle of devil's advocate. I'm still going to stop using that word because it's not very comfortable.
I'm saying it's a lie, and it's a talbis, and it's playing with the people's mind to say that the evidence do not suggest, that clear-cut authentic evidences do not suggest that Ya'juj and Ma'juj are what? They're alive. It's a tribe that's living. I mean, the fact that Allah mentioned that Dhul Qarnayn, he put them behind a wall in Surah Al-Kahf, and then the same ones are being talked about in the ahadith. So,
but how do you know it's the same ones?
So hear my point. I'm saying this is what it comes down to, though. I mentioned to you the hadith Sunnah Tirmidhi.
Yes.
Hadith Sunnah Tirmidhi. It clearly mentions that every day they're trying to bring down the wall.
That's one hadith.
Say that again.
It's one hadith.
It doesn't matter if it's one hadith.
Why?
Innamal a'malu binniyat is one hadith. It's a hadith that the whole religion revolves around. The whole hadith revolves around the hadith Innamal a'malu binniyat. Bukhari narrated it. It's one hadith. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter to us if the hadith is one hadith, or the 10 hadith, or there's 20 hadith.
As long as it's authentic,
and it meets the conditions.
You take it.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
But isn't that like
But the group that invented this concept of it's a hadith ahad, it's a singular narration, right? Was the philosophers, because they were trying to run away from the hadith because they didn't want because of the intellect. The hadith were telling them things, as well as the Quran, by the way, that they couldn't understand. Like I told you, they couldn't contextualize these things based on their reason. The hadith were telling them things that they couldn't come to know if the hadith didn't mention it. For example, Isra wal Mi'raj, the night journey of the Prophet ﷺ, right? This is something that you can't intellectually deduce this. You can, Big Ben, however, intellectually deduce this or induce this. Does that make sense?
Big Ben?
Big Bang.
Oh, Big Bang.
Big Bang, yeah. I'm saying that's something that intellectually you can use your intellect and reason alone.
That it's expanding and therefore it must have started at a singular point. And so on
but
and
there
so
are some things that are from the unseen,
right.
where there has to be revelation that comes and informs you of it.
Right.
And it's coming from an all-knowing source, Allah Azza wa Jal, all-knowing, all-wise. He's encompassed it completely. And he comes and he tells you, this is how it is. Or he tells his prophet to tell you, this is how it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, their problem wasn't that it's an intellectual impossibility. That's my point. It's not something that's an intellectual impossibility like Christianity, like a triangle with 4 angles.
So what's the problem?
The problem here is that their mind couldn't get to the conclusion on its own. The only thing here is what? That is the only thing that where the intellect is hindered is they're saying, how did it happen? Does that make sense? How? And the how you can't know unless you saw it happen, or someone who saw it happen told you, or you're informed by the one who did it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But that's all neither here nor there. There are things that me and you believe, and we don't know the how. And we don't know, for example, how the earth orbits around the sun. We don't know the specifics, but you believe it, right?
Yeah.
We never actually went outside and saw it, but we believe it based on, the fact that this is an issue that's just out there. It's just known. Does that make sense? There are many things that we believe and we don't know the how. We've not studied the how. We've not gone into the how. We just know it's how. Like, for example, I was doing my driving lesson and my driving instructor was telling me about, the clutch control and everything and whatnot and so on and so forth. So, I understand that when you put your foot on a clutch, this happens and you change the gear, but I didn't understand how. He kept asking me how. I'm like, I don't understand how. He's telling me, there's plates within the car, and then when you put
engages
the clutch down
and disengages.
So that's all the how.
Yeah.
No problem. But just because you don't know the how doesn't mean that you throw out the what.
Yeah.
The what is. Does that make sense? Now the what is coming from Allah and it's coming from the Prophet ﷺ. And just because you don't know the how doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Their issue was they wanted to know everything intellectually. They wanted to rationalize everything. If I can't rationalize it, I'm going to throw it out the window. And that's why what they said is these hadith are breaking our backs. So they said any hadith which is singular, we're going to reject it. And the issue is that the majority of our hadith are singular. So for them, for the hadith to be authentic, it wasn't enough. Even if it's authentic, but it goes against our intellect, we're going to throw it out the window.
So to an extent, obviously, people who had reject all hadith in totality, they're a different level. But this is like quite similar to that.
This is where hadith rejection started. In fact, hadith rejectors use these philosophers, Ash'aris, the Jahmiyyah, the Mutakallimin, the Mu'tazila, they use their arguments. The Shia also are in this. They use their arguments, they rehash them and just evolve them, basically.
But is there anything wrong with the concept of, let's say, for example, there's been an idea or a concept that's been a traditional view?
Yeah.
For example, scholars have all held that view.
So sorry, just to cut you off. Bringing back to the point that you made earlier, which is that traditional medieval view, right? So here's my point: is that there is clear-cut evidence that shows about Ya'juj and Ma'juj and the Prophet's night journey and all of these things. But put the evidence to a side. We were told to follow the Salaf.
Who told us to follow the Salaf?
The Prophet ﷺ and Allah Azza wa Jal.
When?
First, who are the Salaf? The Salaf starts with Sahaba, right?
Yes.
Sahaba. That's the Sahaba and the students and the students.
So the first 3 generations of Islam.
So Allah Azza wa Jal clearly said to us, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. Allah said that they will only be guided if they believe the way you and those who are with you believe, Muhammad.
Okay.
Allah didn't say amanta. Allah didn't say they will only be guided if they believe the way you believe, Muhammad. Allah said they will only be guided if they believe amantum. Even in Urdu we have the word tum. Right? But in Arabic it means amanta. Ta means you, amantum means you and those who are with you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So Allah Azza wa Jalla said to the Prophet, they will not believe, they will not be guided unless the way that they believe their iman, is what? Exactly how you and those who are with you, the Sahaba. Another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, no, look, there's another ayah. Allah said, وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُم بِإِحْسَانٍ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ. Allah mentioned there's two groups of people, the Sahaba, Muhajirun and the Ansar. And then there's what? The ones who follow them in good.
Right.
Allah said, these two groups are the only ones that Allah is going to be pleased with. And the only ones who Allah is going to take to paradise. Surah Tawbah, Surah number 9, verse number 100. Meaning, you're not going to go to paradise if you're not from one of these two groups.
Okay.
Allah is not pleased with you if you're not from one of these two groups. Question, are me and you a Sahabi?
No.
Is anyone a Sahabi?
No. Not. I mean, alive today.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, good. So then there's no hope of being in that group. So the only hope for salvation, the only hope for Jannah is to be those who follow the Sahaba. So Allah connected our salvation to following the companions. Does that make sense? So for us to come out and now say, oh, we've progressed. We don't need those old interpretations, those traditional orthodox interpretations. We need to progress. Wallahi, what are you? Islam is not a academic exercise where it's about finding and researching and evaluating and you've never explored everything and there's always an option for things to evolve and things to come out. And no, Allah said, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum." On this day, your religion's been completed.
But to what extent do we follow? Meaning, obviously, there's limitations, right? We don't just blind follow in every single matter that we find.
You follow based on evidence. You follow based on evidence and so you follow them based on the authentic evidence, the fact that they haven't gone against it, and you follow their interpretation, as long as it doesn't go against the evidences.
But no doubt there are things that weren't apparent in their time and they never spoke about and they never gave rulings on that we today have. For example, stuff like IVF, in vitro fertilization.
Yeah,
so how do we follow the Sahaba and like that when they didn't have that in their time?
Yeah, so you still follow them based on the principles that they left behind. Like for example, I'm trying to think of it. Let's give an example that everyone knows. Weed wasn't mentioned at the time of the Sahaba. Was it mentioned at the time of the Sahaba?
But intoxicants were though. And weed comes
exactly, there you go. So there's principles that were laid behind the Prophet and Sahaba. They left these principles behind. And the principles they left behind, we use them to understand the contemporary things that come around today.
But what if, for example, a particular view that's traditional and orthodox that's followed by the Sahaba, for example, the issue of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, what if that's causing people to apostate because they can't rationalize it, so therefore they're leaving their religion? So shouldn't we then try and find new interpretations of it just so that we keep people in the deen rather than them leaving the deen because the traditional orthodox version, it doesn't make sense. It's pushing people away from Islam. So shouldn't we be trying to find new versions that fit and make everyone happy?
Allah said He completed His deen. Who are me and you to find a new version to it?
Not find a new version, but as in like just
new interpretation.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. When Allah said something, there was an intended interpretation behind what He said. When the Prophet says something, there was an intended interpretation.
But how do we know that? As in, even within sects, people will disagree. Even scholars themselves disagree.
That's my point. Is that the way that you stick by the interpretation that was intended is the Sahaba. Because they were there at the time these ayat were coming down. They were there at the time the Prophet was teaching. He was teaching the interpretation to them. They saw the interpretation of these ayat and these ahadith live in action. They lived the interpretation. So the same way you trust the Sahabi with the hadith being authentic. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said that the Prophet, he heard the Prophet say, you trust him in the wording of the hadith. Trust him in the interpretation as well. He knew it better than you.
Okay, so but what about interpreting the speech of the Sahaba? For example, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu.
Who?
Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu.
Yeah.
The hadith regarding Ya'juj and Ma'juj in Tirmidhi. How do we know whether he was saying it metaphorically or literally? Because if I say it's metaphorically, I'm still following him. Yeah. But I'm just following him in a different way to you.
The argument is a very poor argument. I'll tell you why. Because a metaphor is always used where the context makes it clear it's a metaphor. Otherwise, the default position of speech is that it's al haqiqa. It's upon its
literal meaning.
Upon literal meaning, right? Now, for example, if I told you I saw a lion, there's no reason for you to believe I'm talking about anything other than a four-legged animal from the cat family that roars, lives in the jungle. Like, there's no reason for you to believe anything other than the literal meaning. But if I told you, oh,
He was a
I
lion in
saw
the
a
boxing
lion in
ring.
the gym. Straight away now, the fact that I said gym, you've understood, you don't find lions rolling around the gym. I'm talking about a strong guy in the gym who's pumping heavy weights. Does that make sense? So there's nothing from these narrations that implies or invokes anything in anyone's mind to think that there was a metaphor. Does that make sense?
So does that mean that we're not allowed to then take it to like a metaphorical meaning at all?
No, not at all. No, not at all. A metaphor is when there is a qarina, there is something that diverts it from its literal meaning. Does that make sense? And can I just say something, Akhi? You know when people dive into their intellect too much? It's a very important point to mention, yeah?
Go on.
And this was the point that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu made when you talked about the relationship between the intellect and the revelation. He said the intellect is like the eye. It can see, but not when it's dark. The revelation is the light that sparks
Yeah.
the light, and then it allows you to see.
Yeah.
Right? These people, now if I was to walk around a room, and the lights off, what's going to happen?
You stumble into things, you hit things,
I'll do some pretty stupid stuff, right?
yeah.
Like I'll grab something that I'm not supposed to. I'll put my foot somewhere. Like if you told me, on that note, turn the light on. Yeah. if you turn the light off in a room and you told me just walk around to find my way around,
Yeah.
you might come around and find that like I'm sitting on top of the TV. Because I'm supposed to be sitting on a chair, but I'm sitting on top of the TV. Like, you think, what are you doing there, bro? Does that make sense? Or the TV stand or the coffee table. That's not a place to sit. But when I can't see clearly,
You're incapacitated.
I'm incapacitated. Does that make sense? Now here's the issue. These people who use their intellect and their reason are just like that. I mean, look at this individual who said that Ya'juj and Ma'juj he couldn't comprehend it. He actually said that it makes more sense
That they're going to be
that
zombies.
they're going to be zombies.
There's going to be a zombie outbreak.
There's going to be a zombie outbreak. Why? Because of horror movie genres. And pay attention. Look at this. Look at this. What did he say in the video? He actually said,
Let's look at these traditions again. We see that, first and foremost, Ya'juj and Ma'juj seem to be human but not human. You see where this is heading? And they seem to be a race of people that cannot be fought. And they seem to be doing things that are bizarre. Drinking up all of this water. That's not, humans can't do that. Mentally, they don't seem to be 100% there when they think they can kill the people of the heavens. This isn't normal. This isn't rational. The regular human beings alive, the followers of Isa, are so terrified of this group that they don't even want to see them. They're fleeing away from them. They will not fight them. The hadith mentions they will not be able to be fought. لا يدان أحد من قتالهم. And he mentions, if you look at the popular imagination of our times, you find a genre of literature and horror movies. You see where this is heading. And he mentions the word. And my jaw just dropped and I laughed. I said, are you serious? He goes, hear me out. Don't call them that word. For those who don't know the word, maybe the youngers can tell them later on. Don't call them that word, but the concept. What if we're talking about chemical warfare, we're talking about Dajjal, we're talking about the bird falling down, things are happening, weapons being unleashed, weapons beyond our understanding. What if the concept is there, that these groups of people are human but not quite human? And they're doing all of these things, and everything just started clicking in my head. Check, 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 check. I'm like, this is so ridiculous. You will never find me saying this in a lecture, and here I am in a lecture saying it. But in any case, Allahu A'lam, frankly, it makes more sense than believing that 1 billion people are somewhere in Timbuktu or Zimbabwe or some faraway land. It makes more sense to me. Because Allahu A'lam at the end of it, also, ayas, the key point. They shall die the death of one man. How will they get gotten rid of? Allah will send a disease, some type of antivirus, some type of vaccine. I'm just saying what my friend said. Because the hadith mentions this explicitly, does it not? Allah will send something that will get them in the neck, and they will die the death of one person. So when my friend kept on going over all of these points, my laughter turned to a serious contemplation. And I said, but how do we tell the public this? Then I said, I'll just project it onto my friend, which it is true, it is coming from him. And I'll take myself out the picture so that as you laugh at my friend, but the laughter will slowly turn to contemplation. And deep down inside, you'll realize this makes a lot more sense than anything else out there.
This is not
Because
me.
there's a genre, there's a horror movie genre, it's not hard for you to conceive that there could be some kind of, he didn't use the word
Because
zombie.
that's been brought to your intellect.
Yeah, because but that's the whole point. That today, can I rationalize that zombies are going to be flying around? Can I understand that intellectually?
You can.
Say that again?
Because of the fact that there's...
But I can conceive that that kind of reality could take place. I just don't know how. I just don't know how. How would a person be a zombie?
Yeah.
But the concept is not. Is like I can see it play out in my mind. In my mind.
Because of the fact that there's films and TVs
does that make
and
sense?
shows
So the
and-
same way I'm saying, if that's the case, why is it so hard for you to conceptualize that Allah Azza wa Jalla, with all His might and power, the one who made Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, without a father, He created Adam without no mum and no dad. Allah Azza wa Jalla, who, He created the hellfire and paradise. He did all these things. He has this ability to do whatever it is that He wants. Why is it so hard for you to conceptualize intellectually that He has the ability to have a tribe hidden somewhere?
I don't think the issue was ever Allah's ability to hide them.
No, but that's my point. But that's my point. Is that you intellectually are able to what? To rationalize a zombie outbreak.
Yeah.
And that's closer to you, rationally. But you're not able to rationalize.
That
or
there's a
you're-
group of people.
That there's a
hidden.
group of people that Allah Azza wa Jal has... He's got them somewhere on planet Earth. 65% of which, by the way, has not been explored. The majority of which has not been explored. Does that make sense?
So you're saying basically that's more of a rational...
I say that's more of a rational thing.
Than
And that's my
zombies.
point, is that when your eyes are when your eyes are open but it's dark, you're incapacitated. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna do dumb things, and that's what these people do. I mean, look how dumb it is for you to say Allah, the King of Kings, who said in the Quran, this authentic hadith that tell you there is a group of people who are behind a wall on planet Earth. For you to say, nah, that's far fetched. But He said, what's closer
Yeah.
is a zombie outbreak.
Yeah.
That shows you, as Allah Azza wa Jalla said in the Quran about these people, they have ears,
But they don't.
but they
have-
don't listen. They have eyes, but they don't see. Allah Azza wa Jalla said it's not that they can't see, it's not that their eyes are that they're deaf, but rather it's that their hearts, it's that their hearts are gone. Does that make sense? And that's what happens, that the more you see a person, he's qareeb, he's close to the Quran and the Sunnah, the more sound his intellect is going to be. The more you see a person is far from the text, the more stupid his intellect. Well, I'll be honest with you, I will not be able to, in my mind, ever have a discussion with the guy that told me that there's more reason to believe a zombie outbreak can take place as opposed to what Allah and the Prophet said. And to actually have an intellectual academic conversation. Like
But I think again.
No, but hear my point.
That wasn't no. But I'm saying I do believe you're
No,
misconstruing it.
I'm not misconstruing.
From the
You know
angle
why?
of,
I'm
he's
not
saying that
misconstruing.
no. But what
He
was
co-
said
he-
is that
he-
a
no, he
zombie
clear-
outbreak is what Allah and the Prophet ﷺ have said is going to happen.
Say that again?
The argument is that Ya'juj and Ma'juj. I believe in Ya'juj and Ma'juj, but I still don't believe that they're alive right now.
Yeah.
I believe that at the time Dhul Qarnayn, a group of people, he built a wall, bang, they were there. But Ya'juj and Ma'juj that's going to come later
Yeah.
might be a separate group of people, new people.
But he's denying the whole concept of them being behind the wall. He's denying
Until
the whole
now.
narrative. Huh?
Until now.
Until now, yeah. And I'm saying you have Allah and His Messenger telling you that. But you're
just
refusing
on that
to
point,
believe it based on your intellect.
just on that point.
One second, because I'm not misconstruing it. I
no,
really
no,
want to
no,
respond.
but I was saying on that point,
Yeah.
just to be very crystal clear,
Yeah.
where is it mentioned that they're alive till now today? I know we mentioned it before,
The
but
hadith
just,
Sunnah Tirmidhi shows
so
it.
there's a hadith that
Yeah.
clear
They're constantly trying to break
says,
down the wall every day. Every day they're working to try and break down the wall.
but yet someone's now coming out saying that no, they're not. I don't.
Yeah,
believe
and
that.
he's actually saying that there's more reason to believe.
So I guess an interesting
He
question
says
would
more
be to
reason
ask
to
this
believe
individual.
that zombies. And I said, okay, this is why Professor Lawrence Krauss, when he was asked intellectually, rationally speaking, is there anything wrong with the incest? He said no, there's nothing wrong. That's why Richard Dawkins said, I don't rationally see anything wrong with mild paedophilia, because in his mind he's saying, I can't see an actual harm that comes from it. Mild paedophilia. The child doesn't remember it. It's only mild. It didn't really have an effect. But it's because they're far from revelation. They don't, because they're blind right now. There's no light. Like me and you would think, what kind of stupidity is that, bro? And literally, akhi, like, if a guy wants to have a conversation now, an academic PhD conversation about zombies, like, and they picking that, and where did that come from, by the way? It came from horror movies. Like, it didn't come from Quran Sunnah. I'm saying we're saying it came from Quran Sunnah, but you're saying that there's something that come from horror movies, Spielberg and that we can conceptualize rationally more than what Allah and His Messenger said. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said.
Sallallahu Alaihi
That
Wasallam.
person, I'll be honest with you, like it's dangerous, like lying, man. Like, remember something: the closer you are to the text, the more sound your intellect will be. The further you are away from the text, the more what?
Is there a relationship between the text and
That's the ayat I just gave you.
Oh yeah.
They have ears, but they don't listen with them. They have eyes, but they don't see with them. Not just that. This doesn't, by the way, take away from the fact that they might have some knowledge. Like Allah Azza wa Jalla said, these people, when it comes to the dunya, they've got knowledge. But as for the affairs of the hereafter, they don't know anything. So they have knowledge about, technology and biology and,
Academia.
yeah, they have that stuff. But the basics, like incest,
You know what's scary though, man? It's just,
zombie outbreak.
but the way it's portrayed is so eloquent.
Yeah.
So, like when that seed's planted, like I remember at the end, he's kind of said when I first heard it, I laughed. And as I'm sure you guys are going to laugh as well. And of course, when you first hear it, you're going to laugh, right?
He's like, and
But
as you're
then he
laughing,
says-
but then you're realizing that it might
And
still
then
be-
exactly, then you realize, oh wait, tick, tick. They'll die one
Yeah.
death, tick, tick, tick. And even the person sitting there will start thinking, raw, this actually does make sense. You get it? Like it's so, comes across so, if it's intentional, obviously, we don't know if the person's intentional, but if it is intentional, it comes across as so sly to be,
Yeah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said one of the things that I fear for you the most is the Prophet said munafiq, alim bil lisan, is a hypocrite. He's very knowledgeable with the tongue. Yujadilu bil Quran, and he uses the Quran to debate with you.
SubhanAllah.
He's a hypocrite though. He's very eloquent with his tongue.
Not that we're calling anyone a hypocrite.
I'm not any, but the concept is there. As in, the Prophet said in another hadith that in speech there is magic. There's magic in some people's speech. And that's the point, is that the way to protect yourself is not to be attached to personality or speech. It's to always ask yourself, Quran, Sunnah, and what did the Sahaba say? But our deen is not an academic exercise. Our deen is not science where we do experiments. Because look, what's academia? Academia is all about falsification.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about falsification. Science is about falsification. What that means is that you don't have all of the pieces of the puzzle to see the full picture. Every day, you find a puzzle piece, you find a puzzle piece, you find a puzzle piece. You think the picture's complete, but then, when you get that extra puzzle piece, it makes you realize, oh, wait, no, there's something else in this picture we ain't even seen yet. So you keep adding a puzzle piece every day, and then you get more of a picture, and you will never, by the very nature of the scientific method, you will never have all the puzzle pieces. Because in order for you to have all the puzzle pieces, that means you have to have observed every possible outcome that was, will be, and has been. Does that make sense? So because you've not observed all the puzzle pieces, you'll never fully understand. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
So for you to now come with that limited mindset, and I lost my train of thought anyway.
But I was going to say, we'll end it there, but one last thing I wanted to mention is, this is just a personal observation, is that, I find a trend that people are coming out with beliefs that 5-10 years ago, they would have been, you guys are like heretics, like how dare you come out with things like these? But I just feel like slowly, like people have been softened so that when these sort of things come out now, people start to accept it. Some people are defending it, saying, what not, like how do you know, and this and that one, blah blah blah. Like there's so many, for example, people coming out saying that voting is worship, and people saying that student loans is investments, and now you get Georgia McGeorge not there, and the next thing they'll be saying that I don't even want to start to imagine of what's yet to come and what's coming next if this is the road that we're going down. But I'm saying, why is it now that these things are starting to come out? Why is it that like I said 10-15 years ago, these sort of things people would never have even thought to say stuff like that? Why is it that people starting to get the confidence to now come out and say these things?
It's because actually, when there's no one there to challenge you with knowledge, you will do whatever you want, isn't it?
In
So
what
these-
sense?
As like we live in a day and age where knowledge is little. People of knowledge are very far and few. It's kind of like how it's like a strong person. You're not really that strong.
Just to clarify, when you say foreign for you, like, are you trying to imply there's only like a select amount of scholars that we follow in a select
I'm just saying
country, or
in this day and age, like the Prophet said, there won't be a time that comes after every generation, except it will be worse than the one before it. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu explained this is because knowledge will keep dying out, and every generation
there'll be
less
less
and
scholars than the ones before?
Yeah, so we live in a day and age where there's less scholars, because scholars, when they're around, knowledge is being spread and knowledge is being taught. People can't talk. But when there's no one to talk, any guy can just come and say whatever the hell it is that he wants.
Nowadays, you've got people saying that, you know, nail polish is permissible for women to wear outside. It's permissible for women to wear makeup, and
It's very sad.
it's just a vacuum of knowledge, basically, because it's not.
Yeah, and it's a vacuum of knowledge, and there are people
I think knowledge is there, but it's just people don't want to.
Like even this, people have personal things that they're trying to gain from the deen. Like for example, so I just remember, you know, when I said I lost my train of thought, I remember the point I was making, which is that our deen is not an academic exercise.
Yeah.
Like, you know, for you to treat this deen like an academic exercise, that academia is all about, you'll never know the correct answer, so every day you keep adding a piece of puzzle to get closer to the truth, and it's all about the guy who finds the new puzzle piece that makes it all exciting. Oh, look what I found that you guys didn't know.
Yeah.
But our deen is the opposite, because our deen, everything has been locked. Allah said, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum." On this day, I completed your religion. So Islam's complete. It's locked. It's sealed. Does that make sense? For you to come with your academia now, it's wise, because a person, he didn't become a scientist. He didn't become a scientist. He didn't become no massive entrepreneur, no massive inventor, or he didn't leave his mark behind in the dunya. He just happened to be, you know, a person who knew, you know, he studied, got a degree from Medina University. But he wants that academic profile. Because I'll be honest with you, Akhi, in the deen, like in Islam, like there's many big scholars, but they can't. A lot of them can't shine bright stars like Al-Albani or Ibn Taymiyyah, because very few are gonna, like, they will reach very high levels of knowledge. Like they'll be from the elite, but you might not mention their names in books because they didn't bring anything new. Like Ibn Taymiyyah is known why, because
So what you're saying, those scholars brought new things to the deen? But
no. What I mean by bringing new is that's the point I was just about to make. Like Al-Albani, he authenticated hadith that hadn't been authenticated before. Does that make sense? Ibn Taymiyyah came and refuted the groups that the people were not able to respond to. But now that he's responded to them, if someone else writes a book on the Ash'ari, it's like, but Ibn Taymiyyah already done it. Does that make sense? So people are looking for the new thing to be remembered. You know what I'm saying? Ibn Taymiyyah didn't mess around with the deen, though. He didn't bring anything new in the deen. He done something for the deen in a context which was new. Does that make sense? But that requires effort. That requires this, that, and the other. These people are just taking the easy route out. They're treating deen like it's science. Our aqeed is evolving. Our creed is evolving. Every day we find new things. And
I think even but those people, they admit and they say that them going to these Western, you know, universities and so on and so forth is what led them to have that mindset and that approach in the first place. And so what you're basically saying is that approach and mindset doesn't work with Islam, because Islam's locked. So you trying to come with your academic Western intellectual, nothing is fixed, everything can be improved mindset into the deen.
It doesn't work.
Because it's true.
That's
in
exactly
fact,
what
the
bid'ah
very
is.
example that was given is that Medina and Azhar will build a building for you, and then you go to Yale or Harvard or whatever, and they'll then break down that building for you back to the building blocks, and then you have to build it yourself. So that's essentially what's happening now. So people trying to build the religion,
themselves.
their own version of the religion.
And I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you
by
something.
themselves.
Every single thing that those people, they bring up as doubts, every time they try to break the building, there's responses for all that stuff.
You just have to find it.
No, the issue is that the person, when he doesn't have the knowledge really to respond to those things himself, he suffers from an inferiority complex and he succumbs to them. That's really what it is. And he follows it. You can't beat them, join them. That's what it is.
Especially if you.
But there are people that can,
if someone.
there are people that can beat them. But some people you have to be humble enough to put your hand up and say, I don't know, and go back to the very scholars and tell them, I didn't study this book. Tadmuriyah, Ibn Taymiyyah, like he explained, like some of the
Okay, so what you're trying to say is basically like some people, if they believe that they've grasped, they've got it all, then when something comes that they don't understand, for them it's like, right, I had it all. This still doesn't make sense. Therefore,
But
this must be
never had it all.
mashed up. But
You
the
never
point
had
is,
it all. You
no
never had it
one ever has it all.
No.
Okay, I think that was quite a productive podcast.
And you didn't want to do it at the beginning.
And no, I want to do a different topic. But
Anyway, I'm going to abruptly leave because that's pretty SubhanAllah.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I already prayed. Okay, barakallah feek.
Huh?
Actually, I already prayed when I was getting the microphone stuff. And we'll leave it there. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters.